The lobby group Family First says parents shouldn't trust censorship standards in this country. And certainly our TVs are beaming images into our homes, which even 10 years ago probably wouldn't have been acceptable. And now a top children's novel has been heavily criticised for its sexual content and language, although it won an award earlier this year as the best children's book. So what's the effect on our children, and for that matter, our adults, of regular exposure to sex and violence? Our guest on End Zone now is psychologist and counsellor from Mindworks, Sara Chatwin. Well, Sara, thank you very much indeed for sparing time for us today. And on a day like today, when we've seen the shooting in Washington, 13 people dead, you have to wonder if the diet of violence that we often see on our TV screens as entertainment, if that does desensitise us.
Just horrific, isn't it? And we see so many of these tragedies just play out literally in front of our eyes. And I agree with you. I mean, is there some connection between what we see and what plays out? And I think that research quite clearly points out that there can be.
Well, let's talk about some of the issues that are involved. It does seem to me, just as a parent and as an observer, that there is more sex, more violence, more trauma, not just on TV, but everywhere, films, video games, everywhere.
Yes, and does that necessarily mean that it's becoming more acceptable? I guess that what the research suggests is that the more we're exposed to that kind of stuff and the more we see, the more desensitised to it we become. So, in effect, it may become more acceptable to us. And of course, if you're viewing that kind of stuff from an early age, you know, as you grow, it becomes more acceptable that it's just there, and then perhaps you even want more of it, or you're accepting of more and more of it. So it doesn't seem to be a good pattern emerging.
But certainly a lot of the movies that are popular, particularly with the sort of young males, actually old males too, to be perfectly honest, but the superhero
Yes.
movies, it's cartoon violence, and so it's things happen that in real life would be tragic disasters. But in a cartoon movie like, I don't know, Superman or Batman or Spider-Man, no one, people get up and walk away from
Yes.
what would otherwise be a trauma. Does that sort of cartoon violence, does that mean that we're not realising what the real consequences of violence are?
Look, some would argue that, it starts there. It might start in that cartoon kind of format. But of course, I guess it's up to parents, teachers, people around children to point out this is fiction, not fact. And there are the differences that you need to understand. So whereas Superman can push a car away and it can hurtle off into the distance and not harm anyone except the car, people need to know that those things aren't for real. So I guess that, this kind of thing can start there. But I think it's the more hardcore and seemingly the stuff that's becoming more acceptable, the violence, the man against man violence, the sexual stuff that is becoming a little more prolific and sending interesting, if not wrong, sometimes wrong messages to younger people.
Now, I mean, I know you do a lot of counselling, you're a registered psychologist. Are you aware that over the last few years that people are coming to you with more problems as a result of that sort of thing?
I would have to say yes, yeah, definitely. And I think younger. I'm seeing younger people through my clinic who, are dealing with things that perhaps I didn't see so much of, 5 or 10 years ago. So I would have to say that from my perspective, there is an increase. Now, this could mean that there are a lot of things happening. Perhaps, two working parents aren't there to, give their children direction. Kids are spending a lot of time on their own, or the peer group becomes very important. So what other kids are doing, influences your child, and, they might be looking at different stuff and watching different stuff. And I think also the advent of computers, internet, video games, PS3, those kind of things certainly have taken this kind of stuff to a different level.
It's interesting as well that it's not just the electronic media. There's been a lot of fuss over the book that won the Children's Book Award this year, Into the River, which some said was was immoral, and it was full of unnecessary sexual scenes, language that would be normally unacceptable. Yes. The author says, actually, that's what real life is like, and this enables kids to go through what they would do in that situation without having to actually go through that situation. Is that an argument?
Look, yes it is. I don't know that book per se, and I haven't read it, so I'm not aware of the material in it. Very different schools of thought, aren't there? Sure, the argument that the author puts forward is probably quite valid. But for a lot of parents, they see their role as a teaching role. They don't necessarily want it to come from someone else in a book. Children who perhaps jump on the bandwagon because mum and dad don't want them to read this will perhaps have a sneaky little look, and it breeds this kind of atmosphere of, oh, I've almost got to read it. And whether or not, there will always be a percentage of children that respond negatively to that kind of thing. I think there probably will be.
Oh, you mentioned peer pressure, and of course that's another thing. Not just, I guess, with kids, but with adults as well. In that,
doesn't stop, does it?
Yeah, we're all affected by people around us who say, "Oh, you must go and see this movie. You must read this book," etc., etc.
Yes.
Was there an answer?
No, well, as I said, peer pressure just doesn't stop, and we think that we've kicked it when we leave school, but only to find in the workplace and in our adult life, it is there. And I think it's about perhaps, when we are parents and also people in positions of power, for example, educators, really trying to empower children to have the strength to stand up and say no. I might just add, as a non-smoker and a non-drinker, and I've never done any of that, so I've never smoked and I've never drunk, the enormous amount of pressure that I had growing up, from my peer group saying, oh, you're so stupid, you don't drink and you don't smoke, and I think it was only my contrary nature that allowed me to buy right out of these scenarios and say no to it. It's very difficult when you have all these people telling you to do it and that it's cool and that's where you are supposed to be and that's what you're supposed to be doing. But we do have to find it within ourselves to, toughen up and have that strength to say no to things that just are not acceptable.
Yeah. Is there a role for the state? I mean, the state does, to an extent, I guess, govern alcohol and cigarettes.
Yes.
Because they say you can't have them below a certain age. Is censorship the way forward? The state says, I'm sorry, we're just not going to allow that to be shown in this country. For
some things, I think there's probably a few parents out there that would like that. And certainly in some cases, myself, I kind of think, well, I'd like somebody else to step in and say no. Is it the answer under that kind of umbrella? Not necessarily. I do think that there should be obviously watchdogs, bodies, people in positions of power who perhaps suggest that, this has a rating and that has, similar to films and bits and bobs. But I guess it's, freedom of choice, and thus it falls to parents, educators, adults to guide children, through. And if you haven't had such great guidance in your own life, but you become an adult that has kind of fuzzy boundaries, so it's difficult. It's difficult to know. Alan, how can we solve the problems of the world in this shorter space of time? That's what I'm worried about now.
It does feel, though, that that we're on a sort of downhill slope. Every year it seems to get worse, and programs that now we watch at 7:30, 8:30 at night have got content that I'm sure 10 years ago wouldn't have been allowed out until much later in the evening, and it just seems that we're heading downhill, actually sometimes quite fast.
Now, Alan, I'm a psychologist, so I don't want to get negative. I can see what you're getting at, though, and certainly times change, don't they? And because of technology and advances and the internet and all the rest of it, we are exposed to so much more. And I understand that view. And at times I think I felt it myself when I think, sheesh, is that what's on tonight? Wow, okay. And I don't consider myself to be A, old, or B, a fuddy-duddy, or whatever people like to call people that have an opinion on these things. But yeah, I don't necessarily think it means that we're on a spiralling downhill. I think it just means that maybe we've eased up a bit and maybe we need to just step back sometimes and go, okay, how acceptable is this to me? And of course, you make a choice for yourself. As an adult, you probably make a choice for your children because you are the architect of their destiny for X amount of years. In your household, you need to be aware of what's going on and what's being watched on computers, on TVs, what's being listened to, what's being read. I mean, you need to be your own little censor, don't you? So I guess, you know, there's a part that the state can play, a very large role that educators and parents can play in guiding children and the youth through these kind of things.
It's quite hard for parents though, isn't it? Because they just come across as oh, killjoys, you know, oh, but mum.
But you know, at the end of the day, who cares if they're perceived, if you're perceived as a killjoy? As an adult, you know, I'm happy with that. If my children look at me and go, oh, you're so boring and you're a killjoy, I go, bring it, fine by me, as long as you're safe and hopefully going to grow into an adult that's a productive part of society and is happy with... I'm okay with being a killjoy, Alan, aren't you?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I'm sure my son thinks all the day. I mean, what? But it's hard to explain to young people, isn't it, that something isn't right. And I guess this isn't just talking about things that they may see on TV
right.
or see in newspapers, but it's a whole raft of things. Our society has become much more... You know, we have a right to do something.
Militant, you know, is that? Yeah. Yes, I can see that, but I also think that it's up to the individual and the, you know, and the family and the community and the society to at some point say, whoa, enough is enough. Or, you know, we all have a certain amount of responsibility that we need to take. And, you know, far be it from me to say that I've stopped doing that. I will stand up and have my say, and if I want to switch a program off and my children are engulfed in it, I don't care. If I think I'm making a good decision for myself, my family, my community, my society. I sound so noble, don't I?
Okay, well, so what are the warning signs that your child is actually being disturbed by what they're seeing that you may not know about? Are there things we should watch out for?
Yeah, I mean, kids often act out. I mean, the research actually has shown that children exposed to levels of violence over a period of time, you know, for a protracted period of time, they'll start lashing out. Some will hit, some will, you know, be horrors. And so there will be these very visible aspects of, you know, behavioural anomalies that start cropping up. If your child starts acting very differently from how you know that they normally are, then that's a sign that something's going on. Secrecy can also be a sign that something is, you know, untoward. And of course, at the end of the day, if as a parent you feel that you're not getting through, I was going to mention this before, seek out the objective opinion of someone else, myself, a health professional that you trust, somebody that is in a position to give you some good advice.
Great advice, Sara. It's always good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
That's all we've got time for this week, but do join Davina William for our sister programme, End Zone Focus. This week we're talking to the CEO of the controversial Glen Inquiry, Kirsten Ray. But for now, from all of us on the End Zone Now team, bye for now. Ka kite anō.